Vince McMahon once said that in this business, you are either moving forward or you are moving backward. The wrestling business proves that brutally. It builds you up slowly, puts gold around your waist, gives you the big moment, then removes the ladder without warning. These 10 wrestlers all felt that drop at different speeds. Starting the list with Soraya Beavis, who walked into WWE at 21 years old and immediately made everyone else look like they had been sleepwalking through their careers. The punk rock girl from Norwich with the pale skin, the dark eyes, and a ring style that felt genuinely dangerous became Diva's champion on her very first night on the main roster. Not in a feel-good scripted moment kind of way either. She actually looked like she belonged there more than people twice her age did. The women's revolution that everyone talks about now, she was supposed to be leading it from the front. Then her body started sending her invoices she could not pay. A neck injury during a tag match did not just sideline her, it essentially ended her in-ring career before she ever hit her actual prime. She spent time as SmackDown general manager, which is wrestling code for "we do not know what else to do with you." AEW gave her a second life and she won the women's title at Wembley Stadium in front of her home crowd, which was genuinely emotional. But a 40-day reign and a slow fade into irrelevance later, she was gone by early 2025, with no real destination in sight. Speaking of people whose ceiling got snatched away, at least Paige had the decency to blame her injuries. The next is the one who blamed nobody, which somehow made watching his AIW run even more painful. Adam Copeland is the rare kind of performer where even his enemies inside that locker room would admit he figured the game out completely. 11 world championships, the first ever Money in the Bank briefcase, a Royal Rumble victory, and a Hall of Fame career built on being the smartest, most manipulative villain the business had produced in a generation. When his neck forced him into retirement in 2011, it felt genuinely cruel because, unlike most guys who overstay their welcome, he was taken before anyone was ready to let him go. The 2020 Royal Rumble return was one of those moments that reminded you why you fell in love with wrestling in the first place. Everything after it had real promise, too. The Orton feud was nasty and personal in exactly the right way. The Rollins program had genuine intensity behind it. For a stretch, it looked like the comeback was going to add something meaningful to an already untouchable legacy. Then the creative team apparently forgot what they had. The bookings got softer, the direction got blurrier, and a man who spent his entire career being the most interesting person in any room started blending into the background. He left after a hometown farewell in Toronto in 2023 and showed up in AEW shortly after as Adam Copeland, which felt exciting for about 3 weeks. The TNT Championship run came and went. Injuries kept interrupting whatever momentum was building. The crowd never stopped loving him, but love alone does not make a compelling television product. For a performer of his caliber, AEW became less a second act and more a very long goodbye that nobody quite knew how to end. Right, so that was a man who never quite got his moment. Next up is someone who got her moment, got injured before it, got injured during it, got injured after it, and then walked out of a job for good measure. If you watched wrestling during the ruthless aggression era and someone asked you to describe Rob Van Dam in one word, that word would probably be effortless. The kicks were spectacular, the aerial game was unlike anything else on the roster, and the charisma required absolutely zero effort because it was just permanently there. He was the kind of performer fans adopted completely, regardless of whether the company pushed him or not, which was fortunate because for a long time the company very much did not push him. That finally changed at One Night Stand 2006 when he pinned John Cena for the championship in front of a crowd that nearly blew the roof off the building. Days later, he was also handed the reactivated ECW World Heavyweight Championship, making him the only man in history to hold both titles simultaneously. It was the peak of everything, the moment the whole career had been building toward. 3 weeks later, he got pulled over and police found marijuana in the vehicle. Both titles were gone within 48 hours, and the push that took years to arrive evaporated overnight. He returned to the company briefly, had a solid run in TNA, including a world title reign in 2010, but the 2006 version of Rob Van Dam never came back. The frustrating truth is, this was not a one-time mistake. It was a pattern across his entire career of never fully committing when the spotlight was brightest. He gave the company plenty of reasons not to trust him, and they eventually stopped trying. From a man who sabotaged himself at the absolute peak, we moved to someone who never even got to find out where his peak was. In late 2012, Ryback was one of the most over acts in the entire company. The squash matches, the crowd chanting his name, the unstoppable monster presentation. It was all working at a level that genuinely suggested a future world champion was being built in real time. By October of that year, he was in a championship match against CM Punk, inside Hell in a Cell, and everything pointed toward this being his coronation moment. He lost, and then he lost again. And then he lost in ways that started to feel less like storytelling and more like a deliberate decision being made somewhere in a Connecticut office. A tag run with Curtis Axel went nowhere fast. A Paul Heyman association fizzled before it started. A WrestleMania match against Mark Henry ended in another defeat. The Intercontinental Championship finally came in 2015, but by then the crowd had emotionally checked out of the whole experiment. He left in 2016, frustrated about pay inequity between full-timers and part-timers, which was honestly a legitimate grievance. What was less legitimate was the Scorched Earth social media campaign that followed, where he spent years publicly attacking management on Twitter, with the energy of a man who had nothing left to lose and also nothing left to gain. He stopped wrestling in 2018, citing serious spinal damage and cartilage loss in his shoulder. Today, he posts food reviews on YouTube. The talent was genuine, but somewhere between the mismanaged booking and the self-inflicted reputation damage, the whole thing just quietly collapsed. Next up is someone whose bridges were burned mostly by her own knees. Matt Riddle was genuinely one of the most naturally likable performers the company had put on television in years. The laid-back surfer energy was not a character, it was just him. And it translated immediately. When he was paired with Randy Orton as RK Bro, the chemistry was undeniable, and for a stretch, he was genuinely part of the main event conversation, feuding with Seth Rollins and sitting comfortably inside the Bloodline storyline, which at the time was the hottest thing in wrestling. Inside the ring, everything was working. Outside the ring, absolutely nothing was. Wellness policy violations stacked up. Suspensions came and went, and periods of unexplained absence started becoming a pattern that the company could no longer keep papering over. When he was released in September 2023, the surprise was not that it happened, but that it had taken this long. Post-company life has been defined almost entirely by his inability to stop creating new problems. He called Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn difficult to work with in early 2024, which Owens pushed back on immediately and publicly. He no-showed a UK charity event in 2025 and kept the deposit. Then he went on TMZ and called CM Punk a creep, before dragging Punk's wife AJ Lee into it with implications that were ugly and unnecessary. He has said publicly he believes a return is still possible. Most people who watch the fallout unfold in real time do not share that confidence. From a man who cannot stop talking himself out of opportunities, we move to someone whose opportunities were taken by forces slightly more federal in nature. Alberto Del Rio arrived in the company with a presentation so polished it almost felt unfair to everyone else on the roster. The ring entrance with the personal ring announcer, the aristocratic character, the legitimate combat sports background, and an in-ring style that could genuinely deliver on the big stage. He won the Royal Rumble in 2011, became the first person to win both the Rumble and Money in the Bank in the same calendar year, and had legitimate main event programs against John Cena and CM Punk. For a period, he was exactly what the company needed him to be. Then the exit started. His first run ended in 2014, following a backstage altercation with a company employee. He returned in 2015, won the United States Championship, and was gone again by August 2016 after a wellness policy suspension. That was the last time he appeared on company programming, and everything that followed belonged to a different and much darker story. His relationship with Paige became public and turbulent in ways that reflected badly on everyone involved. In 2020, he was arrested in Texas on aggravated kidnapping charges, which were eventually dropped in 2021. But reputations do not recover on legal technicalities. Then, in March 2025, at an AAA show in Tijuana, a fan threw coins at him. He responded by hurling a chair into the crowd, and an elderly woman was hospitalized. The chances of a company return are essentially zero at this point, And honestly, the career conversation stopped mattering a long time ago. Right, so that was a man whose story stopped being about wrestling entirely. Tegan Knox's career reads like a medical textbook written specifically to depress wrestling fans. She tore her ACL before her first major tournament. She tore it again during her quarterfinal match against Rhea Ripley at the 2018 Mae Young Classic on live television in front of everyone, which is the kind of thing that makes you question what you did in a past life. She tore it a third time in 2020 during rehabilitation, which at that point felt less like bad luck and more like her knee had developed a personal vendetta. When she finally made the main roster in 2021, the timing was off. The creative investment was minimal, and she was released before anything meaningful could be built. The company brought her back in 2022 for a second attempt, which followed an identical pattern of occasional television appearances, no real momentum, and another release in November 2024. EW offered what looked like a genuine opportunity in October 2025. She and her partner showed up on Collision looking for a spot on the women's roster, got booked for a match 2 weeks later, and then walked out less than an hour before the show went live rather than take the loss. People who had gone to bat for her internally felt completely burned, and the broader wrestling community treated it as a defining and damaging moment. She has mentioned retiring by 2026. Given everything, that timeline feels about right. And finally, the man who went from one of the most celebrated factions in NXT history to posting about his divorce on the internet. Bobby Fish was never the loudest member of the Undisputed Era, but he was absolutely essential to what made that faction work. Alongside Adam Cole, Kyle O'Reilly, and Roderick Strong, the group dominated NXT from 2017 through 2021, with a consistency and quality that very few stables in recent memory have matched. Fish brought a legitimate combat sports credibility to the presentation that grounded everything around him, and his tag team work both inside and outside the company before joining was genuinely excellent. When the company released him in August 2021, the expectation was that an Undisputed Era reunion in AEW would produce something worth watching, and for a brief moment, it genuinely looked like it might. He joined in October 2021, linked back up with Cole and O'Reilly, and the pieces were in place for something that fans had been wanting to see for years. It never came together. Injuries interrupted the momentum, storyline priorities shifted, contract conversations complicated everything, and when his deal expired in August 2022, he moved to TNA, then MLW, then back to the independent circuit where the venues got smaller and the paychecks followed accordingly. In October 2025, he suffered a hamstring injury at an indie show, revealed he had no health insurance, and shared that he was going through a divorce. He described it openly as the darkest period of his life. For someone who was standing in the middle of one of wrestling's hottest acts just a few years earlier, the distance between then and now is genuinely difficult to look at directly.